Today we step into the meat processing side of our beef business. What is the next generation carcass going to look like that defines the processing industry's goal of efficient?
I think it's really going to be targeting that animal that's going to be able to marble, be able to hit that consumer expectation for high quality beef, but to be able to do so at a reduced level of external fat.
Dr. Scott Howard with Colorado State University is my guest as we talk about what this will look like from the packing industry's perspective, what are the factors driving this model, and what we as ranchers may want to consider on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, hi, everyone, and we welcome you again. It's another episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills, coming to you all the way from the northeast corner of the cowboy state of Wyoming, and we're glad to have folks all across the country joining us as they do each and every week. Whether you're listening on the radio or whether you've chosen to download it on your podcast provider, we're glad to have you here with us. Well, if the opening intrigued you in terms of the terminology of next generation carcass, well, today's program is going to be very interesting for you. Dr. Scott Howard, affiliate faculty with Colorado State University, is my guest today as we're going to be talking about that, because really what is coming down the line when it comes to what the beef processing industry wants to see in terms of helping them to be more efficient, be more sustainable, all of those elements that come into play that down and at some point does affect us as ranchers, and that's really going to be the topic here today of our program. So I'm glad to have Dr. Scott Howard with CSU joining us. As always, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be by in just a few moments for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and meteorologist Don Day will join us at the very end of the program to talk about our long-term weather outlook for the country. Right now, thank you to the sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show, Gelbvieh Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For more information, go to their website at gelbvieh.org. Well, let's check in now with the Captain, Tim O'Byrne, publisher and editor of Working Ranch Magazine, for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. Justin, last episode you asked folks to let you know what books that you're reading for the summer. Mine is Logan, The Honorable Life and Scandalous Death of a Western Lawman by Jackie Bohr. Now, this is all about Sheriff Tom Logan of Tonopah, Nevada. Rough mining town up there in the central part of the state, and I'll tell you what, the comings and goings of that crew, it was pretty crazy stuff going on back then. Good read. One little tidbit I caught out of it was kind of very intriguing to me. It was Sheriff Logan had to go to another town about 40 miles away and retrieve a suspect in a case, and they threw two other not suspects, but I guess detainees. One was a man, I forget what his name was, and he and a Mrs. So-and-so. Now these two weren't married, but she certainly appeared to have been married at one point. They stole a horse and buggy at Tonopah in the middle of the night and raced off to this town, and that's where they got caught. And they were sent back to face justice. And I got to thinking to myself, what's the story behind those two? I mean, who were they? What were they doing? That's the equivalent of stealing a Camaro today and heading out of Vegas in the middle of the night for Reno. And I just thought that was kind of interesting. Now, on the second note, Justin, fill everybody in on our exciting news. We are back on AM radio. Tell them all about it, Justin, and have a great show, you guys, and have a great week.
All right. Thanks, Captain. And yes, a new affiliate we'd like to welcome into Working Ranch Radio Show is 880 KRVN out of Lexington, Nebraska. You can listen to it there in the Cornhusker State on Saturdays at noon, Sundays at 4 p.m. We appreciate them joining us here again, 880 KRVN. And as always, you can also listen through any podcast provider out there or also on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM, as it airs Saturday and Sundays at 12 noon Eastern. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about what does next generation carcass mean? Well, you'll find out when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Starting off in the right direction is essential to gaining an advantage later when you go to market your calves. And I have proof that the right direction is with Sim Angus sired calves. A 2020 study by K-State showed that Sim Angus sired steer calves earn more at sale time than all other breed identified sire groups with at least 50 lots represented on Superior Livestock's 2020 summer sales. The proof's right there. For low-risk, high-potential calves with earning potential, be confident that Sim Genetics will give you more per head, period. Stand strong, Simmental. And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. As we head now into our featured interview today, we're talking a little bit about the meat industry here, as we always do here, focused more with us as ranchers in mind. And today my guest is Dr. Scott Howard. He's affiliate faculty with Colorado State University. And Scott, glad to have you here joining us on our program here today.
Absolutely. Very happy to be here, and very happy to get to visit with you and your audience about the industry. Well,
we're going to get into the details of, you have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge about the meat industry as it pertains to the final outcome, the product that goes out to the consumer out there and what that entails to get it to that point. But before we get into some of those questions, first, give us a little background about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I sure appreciate being here. And, I grew up in southern Wisconsin on a small seed stock Angus cattle operation, and kind of got my feet wet to the beef industry through that activity, selling some bulls and showing some cattle along the way. And that led through to some judging programs that took me to Colorado State, a little bit south of Laramie, but I found my way out west and around some cattle that were a little more beef oriented as opposed to the black and white ones back home. But in any case, I ended up at Colorado State and started again through the meat judging program, getting involved with the meat industry. And that led me to a few internships along the way. And eventually I ended up completing a graduate program there at Colorado State, primarily focused on beef quality, growth and development, and some topics associated with carcass yield and valuation. So from there, I went to work with Cargill in a research and development capacity, and spent 2 years in that role, focused on ground beef production and carcass yields. Then on through to another 6 years in supply chain, focused more so on our primary plant running plans and conditions. And then currently, in addition to my roles with Colorado State, I function as a director of operations for Meyer Natural based in Loveland, Colorado. Mm-hmm. So a little bit of a whirlwind to take me from the Midwest to Colorado, but have gotten to meet a lot of great people along the way, and I'm excited to talk with your audience here today.
Well, we're glad to have you here, as I said before. Scott, when you and I, a couple of weeks ago, or it's been about 3 weeks ago, we were on a panel discussion together for the Style Conference down in Oklahoma City. And really, as I listened to your talk there, and I didn't get the opportunity to listen to the entire thing, but for the most part of it there, and I feel sometimes that for us here as us as ranchers, it's good for us to know what down the chain looks like. And I've had other guests on, we've talked about that, but it's always good to come back and talk about some elements of this. We are seeing the idea of smaller processing plants or rancher-owned processing plants becoming a little bit more popular out there, and I think it's important for us as ranchers to know, look down into that a little bit. And so, from your perspective, we all are starting with the product, from the grassroots level. And so, from your perspective, when we look at the type and the kind of cattle that are out there, we really are trying to come up with cattle that are efficient out there. So, from your perspective, what does that look like for that efficient carcass, and what's the start point of that for us as ranchers look like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think it's all the more relevant because you have heard a lot in the live side of production around efficiency related to average daily gain, efficient growth of the animal, those types of things. And as we stop and think about it now on the finished product side, if you will, or in the beef, efficiency really is still a great word to define it. But the way that I like to think of it is moving more towards an efficient model of producing high quality beef. That is, we've reached a point in the industry where clearly we've done a tremendous job of selecting for marbling, selecting for high quality cattle, selecting for cattle that really perform to meet consumer demands. But the next generation of that, in my mind, is really moving towards the type of animal that can do that, but do so at a reduced level of external fat. If we look at the industry today, we're seeing a lot of very big, heavy carcasses that are also carrying a lot of cover. And in doing so, we're producing a lot of essentially, I'm not going to call it waste because there is a use for tallow, but it's certainly a type of carcass that requires more trimming. It requires more labor. It requires more resources at the plant to actually make that finished product that we're targeting. So I think as we really move forward in the industry, and in particular start looking for those types and kinds of genetics that are going to begin with the end in mind, I think it's really going to be targeting that animal that's going to be able to marble, be able to hit that consumer expectation for high quality beef, but to be able to do so at a reduced level of external fat. And I know it may sound a bit like we're chasing unicorns, if you will, when you hear, well, let's create marbling without external fat. But the reality is there have been cattle out in the industry for quite a while that have been high marbling, low fat types of cattle. We just need to start seeking them out more. So I guess to me, as we look at the challenges found in the industry, but still also producing a high quality beef product, that one is just a really top of mind type of challenge when I think about the industry today.
And as you talk about that, the thought that comes to my mind just a little bit here, when you talk about efficiency there, we're talking about efficiency of that final in the beef, carcass that's out there. For me as a rancher here, when I think of efficient, well, I want an animal that's going to be efficient from a feed perspective and do what needs to be done on as little cost as possible. Is that when you say that's the unicorn animal is that what we're talking about here, or are we talking two different animals, or can this be the same animal?
I think it can be the same animal, or maybe I should say it can be the same model. And what I mean by that is I think in the industry today, we have gotten a little bit seduced by the idea of finding the type of animal that can be everything to everybody. And what I mean by that is I understand that we all need to have cattle that can perform in the feed yard, but also hopefully produce some replacement females along the way. But with that being said, there's nothing wrong with having cattle out there that we know are a bit more terminally oriented, or we know are a bit more maternally oriented. And if you really look back at the history of our breeding system, the foundation of the industry has really been driven by that type of an approach. And as we've maybe moved a little bit away from that and more towards cattle that are trying to do multiple things, I think that's where we started to run into some potential challenges. So I guess to me, I certainly recognize and appreciate the need for ranchers such as yourself and your listeners to be able to have that high efficiency, low input type of female that gets bred back each year and is able to have a calf. But on the other side of the coin, is there a mating that can go on to that female that really focuses on some of those terminal traits, that deposition of marbling, that efficient lean gain, those types of things that really target that need for the packer to have a highly lean, highly marbled carcass with a lot of red meat to put in a box. So no doubt it's a challenge, but I think it's something that as breeders, we should all be willing to approach and try and tackle, because it's no doubt the future of where we need to go for efficient resource management all the way through the production system.
Mm-hmm. When we're in this time of the year, we're actually past the spring of the year and just, ways out from the fall when the bull season, sales season will start to pick up a little bit. But that's the time of the year where, there's probably a little bit more focus looking at, okay, what are the kind of genetics that we're going to be looking at in these cattle for the next calf crop, or what direction we're going to be going. And I think this came up in that discussion. We talked a little bit about this in that panel discussion. I felt like there was some discussion about this and some of the focus that had been taking place. And we look at some of these numbers that are more terminal, like a ribeye or a marbling factor, or things like that. From your perspective, when we talk about looking and focusing on the type and the kind of cattle, what's your thoughts, I guess, when we look at these EPDs that we should be focusing on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's for one, I'll start with the fact that no doubt carcass traits are a challenge to select for. And what I mean by that is it takes a very dedicated effort by a seed stock producer to start amassing carcass data on a large scale. Obviously, ultrasound has been a tool that the industry has used for a long time, but at the end of the day, that is a predictor of that ultimate carcass performance. Really putting those cattle on the rail is where the rubber meets the road. And no doubt it takes a lot of concerted effort to get contemporary groups together to do that. So I think there is definitely a premium for seed stock producers who are really making a concerted effort to tie their genetics to actual carcass data and really understand those things as far as taking the next step beyond just ultrasounding their bulls. So that may be a little bit more of a high level statement, but getting more in the weeds, certainly marbling is always going to be a priority. No doubt there is always going to be a reward for highly marbled cattle in our industry. Our consumers continue to tell us that marbling is important. But that being said, in my mind, we've selected fairly hard for marbling and gotten to a point where we really need to start shifting gears and seeing what we can tie in there with it. And those things to me are things like marbling at a slightly reduced level of fat thickness. So a bull that might be a little bit lower fat in addition to having a higher marbling score. One other one that I know has received quite a bit of attention and is a little bit sensitive, especially to the ranching groups, just because, again, it does encourage selection for larger animals, but carcass weight is another one that's out there. And at the end of the day, any metric aside, the best way to add saleable product to an animal is to make them bigger. And I'm certainly not advocating that we start putting a bunch of elephants out on our pastures or anything like that, because there's countless problems that come from that. But again, making sure that we can find that animal that's going to produce that 900-pound carcass, which might mean that it is a 1,450 or 1,500-pound finished steer. We have some concerns around portion size and some things like that, no doubt. But at the packing level, we also have concerns around the total number of pounds that we're going to put in a box per man hour. And the simple truth is that if we run an average carcass weight of 900 pounds at 350 head an hour versus, say, an 800 pound carcass at 350 a head chain speed, you're going to put more saleable product in the box with the heavier carcasses. So again, I guess to me, if I were to kind of put them in order, I'd say a combination of marbling and fat thickness, and then tying in some hot carcass weight to that. And I know I omitted one that's also popular on the radar in ribeye area, so I'll maybe pause and see if you've got questions, and we can talk a little bit more about that.
You bet. My guest today, Dr. Scott Howard with Colorado State University. We're talking about just kind of some of the details about the meat side of the industry that we as ranchers don't always really have a good grasp on, and he's kind of knows the insides of this business, of that side of the business, quite a bit. We're going to continue when we come back here with more. We've got 2 more segments where we're going to visit, and we still have a lot to talk about. Stay with us. You're listening to the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Whoa, Herefords are the efficiency experts for a reason. In crossbreeding systems, Herefords boost pregnancy rates by 7% and add $30 per head in feed yard profitability. And Hereford genetics bring unrivaled hybrid vigor, longevity, and disposition. Now that'll stop you in your tracks. Come home to Hereford for more pounds, more calves, and more profit. Visit Hereford.org for a sale near you.
And welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest today, Dr. Scott Howard, affiliate faculty with Colorado State University, as we are talking more in depth about the beef side of our industry, something that we as ranchers don't really have maybe as much firsthand knowledge. Now, we generally know some of this stuff, but we were talking in the first segment, if you missed it, we were talking kind of about the types and kinds of cattle that they're looking for from the packing side. Scott, right as we headed into break, two things that we were starting to cover, and one was one of those factors. We were talking EPDs when one of the elements in that is, of course, ribeye. Let's hit that real quick, and then I've got a question to head into our next subject on that. So let's quickly recap on that, on the ribeye EPD.
Yeah, just real quickly. I mean, ribeye area is obviously a measure that we're all familiar with, and again, as part of the ultrasound measures that we hit on a bit earlier. I know it's one that becomes very top of mind for producers because it's something that we see in the bulls that we ultrasound and we see hanging on the hook, and no doubt it's important. It's part of the USDA yield grade equation, and if you're selling cattle on a grid, that yield grade is going to be part of that. But, for me, the reason why I would prioritize some of the things that I did in front of that ribeye area in the marbling, carcass weight, and external fat EPDs is that the truth is that science would tell us that ribeye area contributes the least of the overall variation and cutability of that carcass of the variables that are in the yield grade equation. So ultimately, it's going to contribute somewhere between 5 and 10% of the variation that we see in saleable yield within that carcass. So again, it's one of those variables that was, I hate to say, the best that we had available to us at the time, mm-hmm. but when the yield grade equation was developed, it kind of was that. It was an indicator of muscling that was easily measured relative to the other things that we were doing, and based on the anatomical location of the carcass, it was readily accessible to us. So mm-hmm. Is it terrible? Certainly not. Does it contribute some variation in cutability? Absolutely. But I think the real question is, and maybe the challenge for us as a meat industry and even on up through the levels of USDA, is really, what can we do to enhance that yield grade equation? Is there a better predictor out there? And that's really I'll say it's an even more than $1 million type of question, mm-hmm. because it's going to take a lot of very intelligent folks getting their heads together and really digging into that one. And it's going to take a lot of collaborative effort between government, academia, and industry partners to address it. But I think, again, it's something that certainly is warranted in the years ahead, and something that the industry really deserves to help accurately relay a true measure of cutability with relation to these cattle. So a lot of work to be done there, but just wanted to make sure that we address that as kind of that fourth component of cutability.
And as you answered that question, you actually brought up another topic that I let's hit this real quick before we get into labor, the subject that I have. And this yield grade, as you said, are there more accurate methods out there?
Yeah, I mean, so in a purely academic sense, the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. And again, I want to be clear that yield grading is still directionally very accurate. Is a yield grade 1 higher cutability than a yield grade 5? Absolutely. Is a yield grade 3 higher cutability than a yield grade 4? 100%. To me, it's really when we start getting into the weeds and the minutia mm-hmm. of determining, okay, the differences between a yield grade 3.2 and a yield grade 3.7, really what's going on directionally in there. Yeah. And again, from a purely academic setting, there are some pretty advanced technologies that have been applied to a lot of other species, in fact, such as MRI applied to porcine carcasses or pigs that have shown that they can accurately predict to the 100% lean value of that carcass extremely precisely. That being said, X-ray is another one that's out there that we know we can measure the lean content of beef trimmings with an extreme level of accuracy using X-ray. So again, the technologies are certainly there. It's really, like I said, getting together that collaborative approach of industry, academia, and government to really find the one that we feel is most appropriate, the most accurate, the most precise, and the most repeatable to develop the right message that we would need to send back to our producers.
Yeah. All right, let's get into, you touched on it a little bit ago and started down that road, I think, in our first segment with you here. Let's continue down this, because one of the things that you were talking about there, as you were referencing maybe looking at something that could produce a higher carcass weight, which is a little contrary to, to maybe us or some of us as ranchers, because I'm thinking I'm not wanting big, and you mentioned that. But you're also talking about from the meat packing side of things, there's a labor element of that makes a lot of sense in the fact that how much meat can they process on a per hour or per dollar type of a deal. So let's kind of go back to that and let's cover that subject again.
Yeah, so couple things on the labor topic. The end of the day, the packing business is a people business, and we can put all the technology that we want to in these facilities, but as the last couple of years have really painfully shown us, if we don't have people, we're pretty much dead in the water.
Yeah.
And there's really two approaches to that comment, or some of the things that I've hit on so far. One being the level of excess fat in these cattle, and the simple truth is that the move in the industry has been from a more commodity style cut to a further trimmed, more block ready item. That is, a retailer or even a food service person is not going to want to open up and do a lot of knife work on a box of meat that they purchased from a commercial packing plant. So that said, the demand on these packing facilities today is for the removal of really almost all of the fat on the carcass. Again, the amount of cuts that are going out the door today that are merchandised with either an eighth or a quarter of an inch of fat is really exponentially higher than it was several decades ago. And what that means is there's a lot more knife work going on. There's a lot more people allocated to trimming activities and those types of things. That said, if we're sending in cattle with excess levels of fat, it's just all the more labor that has to go into that process. Additionally, that's a lot of fat that we're also paying for at the packing level to get cold. That fat comes in at 101.5, and it takes a lot of energy to get that product cooled down. So not only are we burning resources from a labor standpoint, but we're also burning resources from a truly energy savings type of standpoint. So that's really one key point. The other would be related more towards the carcass weight topic and the cut size. And no doubt we have made these cattle plenty big. But that said, we certainly need them big and high cutability. The reality is that the difference between running carcasses that have an average weight of 800 pounds and those that have an average weight of 900 pounds is really insignificant at a commercial level. That said, if we're going to put an extra, let's say 50 pounds per head in a box on those heavier carcasses, that means that we're spreading our costs out over a significantly larger amount of saleable product. So there really is a demand for some larger cuts, larger cattle at the packing sector, so that we can spread our costs out over more total pounds of saleable product. So just another topic to keep in mind as we consider how we keep the industry efficient and how we most efficiently utilize the man hours that we do have at our disposal.
You bet. Dr. Scott Howard with Colorado State University is my guest today. We've got one more segment, and we're going to talk a little bit coming up next. We're going to expand a little bit more about these types of cattle, carcass composition by cattle type, and then also get into some of the elements within the packing industry that they're focused on, that are some of their value elements to their industry, as well as some of their cost centers as well. We're going to continue when we come back on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Living in the country means working in the country, and that calls for a tough tractor. Well, Bobcat has 15 models in its compact tractor lineup from 21 to 58 horsepower. With the help of your local Bobcat dealer, you'll find a perfect match for your property and to-do list. Get a look at all the different models at bobcat.com, and while you're there, use the Build and Quote tool to design your ideal machine. Get yourself one tough tractor from one tough animal. Bobcat. Visit bobcat.com. And welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest today, Dr. Scott Howard with Colorado State University, as we have been talking about the beef side of our industry here. And we were talking before the break about just, some of the elements in that we don't always think about, as far as the type of and kind of cattle that come into those places, and what they're looking at from an efficient standpoint, and what that means to them. Scott, I want to talk next about, you were talking about heavier carcass weight, that from a labor standpoint, and something that doesn't come in with a lot of fat on it from a chilling cost saving standpoint. Just a lot of elements there that we don't really understand probably or think about as ranchers. So my question now would be, what is this optimal carcass weight or composition that we should maybe try to target?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one big thing that I'm going to throw out there as a precursor to answering that question, right, is that there's a ton of variation in our industry today, right? Just based on geography, cattle supply, cattle genetics, all of those types of things, and we know that that's always going to be true. Climate dictates changes. Simple geography does as well. So we know that we've got a population of British/continental cattle that we would refer to as our traditional types of beef breeds. But we also have two other very, very sizable populations in dairy and dairy crossbred type cattle, and also cattle of Mexican origin. So again, each of those brings to the table a slightly different composition that's going to dictate different end goals in mind. That said, if you really hold my feet to the fire and say, well, what's the target? Well, speaking to a British or continental influence type calf, if we can find that calf out there that can be 0.4 to 0.5 of an inch of external fat, hit that choice or above marbling score, and do so at a carcass weight of 900 to 950 pounds, that's sure checking a lot of the boxes. Now, if I translate that back to live weight, again, we're talking about something that's going to be a shade over 1,400 to maybe 1,500 pounds live, based on a 63.5% dressing percentage. So again, we aren't saying that we want elephants by any stretch of the imagination, but we definitely do want some cattle that have some size, have plenty of red meat on them, still hit those quality marks that we talked about, but more so are contributing to the productivity of that packing plant in terms of being high cutability, high quality types of carcasses.
So that leads me to this question, because as we have talked about this, if there's other ranchers like myself listening out there, you're probably thinking, okay, this is all good and fine, what you're telling me, but am I going to get paid for this?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I think the simple answer is it depends on how you're marketing your cattle, right? Anytime we start talking about retained ownership, obviously that comes with an inherently higher level of risk, and from a purely economic standpoint, if you look at it, most of the time you have to find value in the data that you're getting back off of those cattle to really dictate taking that level of risk. But that being said, if you are confident in those genetics, it may pay. So all said and done, I think it depends on how you're marketing your cattle. It depends on how much information you're able to get back off of the folks that may be downstream from you. And again, the end of the day, it is a risky business to retain that ownership to get that information, but it may be something that you want to pursue if you feel it's appropriate and you're breeding the right type of cattle to capitalize on either a dressing percentage advantage that might be there by selling them in the beef, or a yield and quality advantage that might be there by putting them on a grid. So a lot of questions to be answered though there, and I'm not going to say that there's any one perfect fit for everyone in the industry. I think the biggest advice that I would give to your listeners is just that again, you need to weigh the cost benefit of the whole deal and understand that you are taking risk by continuing that retained ownership through that model, and again, you need to be able to find ways to mitigate that, whether that be through genetic selection, placing value back in the data that you're getting, or some other means.
Before we get into the next topic here, the question I was thinking of as you were answering that was, how does the program cattle, and there's just a lot more popularity in the types of programs, the variety of programs that are out there. How does all of that fit with what we've talked about here today with these programs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and really that's an asterisk that probably goes along with a lot of what I've said, right? We've been talking pretty generically about commodity beef and production of high quality, high cutability type cattle. But that being said, as we've seen these niches start to pop up or develop, natural beef, farm to fork, whatever it may be, no doubt there are going to be different things for different programs that are going to hit the mark. If we look at some of the more successful branded beef programs out there, most of them come with some pretty stringent carcass requirements. And that said, those are geared around exactly what their consumers want. So again, if you as a producer are aligned or targeting one of those grids, some of the things that I may have said may be totally different. And if you're in a grid that rewards you for significantly higher quality cattle and is less focused on cutability, it may be a totally different ball of wax for you. So I think, again, it just goes back to our comments from the get-go that when we begin with the end in mind, we really need to make sure we're targeting what we need to do as far as a producer to approach that end goal and what that end goal may be. And it might not be the same for everybody out there. Yeah.
No, and I think your comment there, beginning with the end in mind, is a great way to look at that, because I think this topic here today wasn't to put everybody in a shoebox here and say this is how you got to do it. I think it's important to understand this is the dynamics that we are seeing in the packing industry, and I think it's a good thing to understand that, knowing that there are some varieties, and we have cattle of all different types and kinds out there for various reasons. Final subject here that I want to get into, and that is looking a little bit more in depth in the packing industry itself, and some of the things as ranchers we maybe don't always see as things that are value drivers for them as packers, the things that are also their cost centers. What are their biggest cost things that they have to focus on that we don't understand? So let's go into that subject if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've hopefully hit on a large part of, the cutability aspect of things that are a huge driver of value in the packing sector. I think we all hear value and we kind of instantly think quality grade and targeting that USDA prime carcass. But just need to understand that those high cutability cattle definitely have a place and are always going to drive value in that packing sector. Now that said, if we switch gears a bit and start talking about costs, again, I made the comment earlier, but this is a people business, and labor is always going to be at the top of that list as far as not just a cost, but as a concern, right? Yeah. When we consider how many people it takes just to keep a plant going, keep the lights on, if you will. I can throw some round numbers at you, but we're talking in a large scale facility, maybe 1,000 people per shift, and we're averaging a wage that's in the mid-20s to pay those folks. So we also have an additional crew that's going to come in each night for cleanup. If you want to break it down a bit and start looking at what does downtime cost us when we have it, just based on the cost of labor, you're going to be somewhere in the $150 to $250 a minute range before we even take into account the value of the cattle. So no doubt those people are not just a cost center, but extremely important to the entirety of the packing industry and that critical to making that plant run. Mm-hmm. If we get into some of the more physical assets, or if you will, packaging is another huge one. It's something that we don't really think about real frequently, but in a large scale commercial plant, we're going to produce somewhere between 8 to 10 boxes per head. Each of those boxes is going to be about 30 cents per box. And within that box, there's going to be anywhere from 4 to 8 bags. Each of those bags might range between a dime to $1 a bag. Long and the short of it, you can pencil the math out however you like, but there's a good $10 to $12 a head there in just packaging cost. Mm-hmm. Cold storage and transportation is another one. I think we've all seen fuel prices, and that hits the packing industry too. We're burning diesel fuel to move loads, and cold storage is another one that's at a premium. Mm-hmm. So no doubt there's a lot of things to consider. I think one of the other things that I like to make sure that audiences like this are aware of as well is the value of rendering. The things beyond the beef, if you will, that are coming out of that carcass that are part of the value proposition are just so extremely important. You can look up the drop credit that USDA reports, and they'll show you, a couple weeks ago, it was $13 a hundred live weight. Mm-hmm. So it's a sizable contribution. And if you start considering some facilities that might not have the ability to take advantage of all of those rendering credits because of some of the limitations, that can be potentially a huge value destruction to the animals that they're processing there. Yeah.
Final question, Scott, and that is, we're seeing a lot more processing facilities coming online or planning to come online, and I'm not gonna downplay any of that. We've seen a lot of ranches start their own to maybe smaller local or regional type plants looking at coming online or will be coming online. As we start to see this expansion in our packing industry, what's your general thoughts of that?
I think it goes back to that comment that we talked about in terms of, we can't shoebox anyone. We can't shoebox anyone in saying that here's the type of cattle that are going to work and here's the type of cattle that are going to be profitable versus those that won't be. That said, I think it's something that if you're going to venture down that road, it's the same concept as retained ownership and putting cattle on a grid. It comes with an inherently higher level of risk. And when you start owning the asset, there is an astronomically higher level of risk that comes along with that. So things like drop credit, rendering, all of those value-added items that happen beyond the beef become exponentially more important in those situations. So I think before I would advocate for anyone to bite off that type of complexity, you really have to get in the weeds and pencil out all of the things that are going to contribute to your bottom line and all of those costs that are going to be pulling away from it. So is there a need for additional shackle space out there in certain areas of the country? I think it's safe to say there is. Mm-hmm. Does that need to be another 5,000 head a day plant? Maybe not. But could it be another local harvest situation that offers an outlet to a group of producers that are able to then market a farm to fork situation? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So again, I think my take home message there is that you just have to very carefully weigh the costs and the benefits and understand that it's not going to be a one size fits all if you build it, they will come type of situation.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I think that's a fair assessment on that as well. So, Scott, that's about all we have time for. I do appreciate you joining. We covered a lot of topics today.
We did. Hopefully we didn't get too far in the weeds on anything, but certainly happy to get to visit with you all.
You bet. Well, again, on behalf of all of us here at Working Ranch Radio, thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you very much, Justin. Have a good one.
And again, that was Dr. Scott Howard, affiliate faculty with Colorado State University, our guest here today on our program. Well, stay with us. Coming up next, meteorologist Don Day will join us as we'll take a look at what the long-term weather is going to look like across the country for the latter part of July and into August when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. For commercial cow-calf producers, crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer is the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. Gelbvieh and Balancer females offer maternal superiority through increased fertility, greater longevity, and more pounds of calf weaned per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer cattle can offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Gelbvieh and Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For more information, go to gelbvieh.org. And welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Justin Mills here as we're joined now by meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. And it wouldn't be summer, Don, of course, if we didn't have extreme weather in all parts of the country, which was what we have definitely seen for the last couple of weeks. There's no question to that. But as we look here towards the middle, looking long-term wise for across the country, you've kind of pegged around the 20th of this month as kind of a time frame that's going to see some weather changes across the country, and I want you to expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, if we were to rewind over the last 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks, starting in early June up to here over recent times, we saw an early summer monsoon pattern developing in Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Colorado, where those areas have finally been able to see some really beneficial precipitation. Really up to the last few days, those areas still have gotten some rain, but there's going to be a little bit of a shift in the weather pattern, especially in the central and western United States, where we're going to see some hot weather and drier weather developing for a while as high pressure, which has been centered over Oklahoma, northern areas of Texas, is going to shift towards the Great Basin states. And what that'll do is bring up temperatures in the west. It's also going to cut off that moisture supply for a little bit coming up out of the southwestern United States. And there will be, the focus of rain will kind of shift out of those southern areas. There'll still be some showers and thunderstorms, but not as extensive. And we're going to see a shift of some better rain chances across the northern plains. That would be Montana, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and parts of the northern and western Corn Belt, which is good for those areas to pick up some precipitation. But in this period of time where it does get warmer and drier in the west, that is certainly going to be a concern for wildfire activity, because you can still have lightning and you're going to have this warmer, drier stretch. But going back to that time frame of around July 18th or 20th, what we see happening is the high that's shifting westward into the Great Basin will then pack its bags and head back to the east, back into the southern plains, going back into that Texas, Oklahoma region area there. And that's going to open the door to that subtropical monsoon moisture flow again. So right around that third week of July and probably up, here we are talking about August already, believe it or not, into early August. I do see a resurgence of that moisture coming back on in. So that's going to be good for the southwestern United States, some of the western high plains, places like eastern Colorado, eastern New Mexico, parts of the areas along and east of the Continental Divide into the Rockies. And what we're going to be looking at, I think, Justin, is as we get into that middle part of summer there, is whether or not we're going to see a significant dry area continue to stay dry. If we were to look at, where the rain hasn't been falling over the last couple of weeks, it has been right underneath that high in the southern plains, parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, parts of North Texas. That is the area that I think will get some relief from the heat and some precipitation as that high retrogrades westward, but may go into problems later in July as that high goes back to the east.
Okay. Let's kind of get an update on what's happening out in the Pacific. Earlier this spring and early summer, we were seeing a lot of storms being propagated off of the shores of Alaska and down into the western side of Canada. That has changed a little bit, but and then also as we drop further south on the equator, La Nina pattern still showing very robust signs of being alive.
Yeah, it is. And while we have seen some weakening of it, which we expect in the peak of summer with the high sun angle on the equator, we still have a very large, extensive area of cooler than average sea surface temperatures that go across the subtropical Pacific. It's a very large area of cool water there relative to the averages. And that, from everything we're seeing on the new modeling, we did get a new set of modeling data for the next month and a half from the European Modeling Center that is basically showing that La Nina through the rest of summer into early fall is going to continue. In fact, maybe strengthen slightly as we get into August, September. The good news, though, is we still see that trend further out in the forecast period of it weakening as we get into probably maybe as early as December, but by certainly January and February. So we still see that. But this, I tell you, is going to be one for the books.
Yeah.
This La Nina in terms of how long it's lasted.
Yeah, it really has, because I know early on, as we were anticipating or wanting it to be over a year ago at this time, it was, we were talking, well, it looks like April, May, and then it was June, July, and now it just keeps hanging in there.
Yeah, we'll call it the supply chain problem. The weather supply chain. We just keep delaying delivery of it, right? And that's, and what's really interesting is there was also a new data set that came out from the satellite that's been the longest. There's been satellite data of global temperatures going back to 1979. That's really the first year when we were able to monitor global temperature on a global basis using satellite data. And what's really interesting, if you were to look at the month of June in the tropics between 20 north latitude and 20 south latitude, it's one of the coldest periods since 1979 in that subtropical region of the world. The tropics, you don't think of the tropics as a cold place, and it's not a cold place, but relative to the 30-year averages, those temperatures near the equator, north and south of the equator, have been very cool. And it's because of those sea surface temperatures cooling off the atmosphere there. And that really does impact things. Yeah. Australia is going through one of its coldest June and early Julys in a long, long time. And, we got to go back to 2012 when it was that cold, and voila, 2012 was the last multi-year La Nina. Yep.
It's interesting how that coincides.
Yeah, the correlation is pretty strong.
Yeah. All right. Well, Don, thanks for joining us with a look at our long-term weather.
Thank you, sir.
Meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. His website is dayweather.com, and I share that with you so that if you want to follow along every Monday through Friday morning for his video weather podcast that he kicks out, you can do that by going to his website, or also easily just go to YouTube and search Day Weather, and you'll find his YouTube channel as well. Well, stay with us. We'll return in just a few moments on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Do you have a young child, grandchild, niece, or nephew that loves the weather and wants to learn more? Day Weather has produced a children's weather journal full of weather facts, fun weather experiments, coloring pages, and pages to record weather observations for every season of the year. The weather journal is for ages 3 to 7 and designed to be fun and educational. The interactive weather projects are fun for the whole family to take part in. For only $10, the Day Weather Journal is a great gift idea for any occasion. Click on our Amazon link to order at dayweather.com.
Well, before we slam the gate on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show, I want to tell you what we are working on now. I'm not sure if I'll have it ready by next week's show or not, but it is something that we are working on. It's some research that's coming out that would provide ranchers with some early warnings for stocking decisions so that we don't get all the way into a drought and then find ourselves in a pickle. Well, there's a lot of weather information, a lot of data out there that could be used. That's what we're exploring. We'll hope to bring that on an upcoming program program here of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, our show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to start your subscription, you can go to the website at workingranchmag.com and start today. Well, we thank you for joining us here on our program, where you'll find us each and every week at the same time and same place. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.